I didn't mean to call anybody. I am.
Alrighty.
It's good to see you too, Greta. But,
Alright, everyone.
Greta, why aren't you at the meeting?
Good to see you all. All
Bye.
6 of you.
Yay!
Yay, we all made it out on this cold rain night.
Okay.
Alright.
Ever since the Discord mobile app update, I've still been trying to figure out how it even works, and
You
I'm
doing
not.
okay?
I can't figure out how to hang up.
Okay.
I don't know how I called in the first place.
Kill the app and it'll hang up, right?
You already tried that.
Really?
I did. I tried killing the app, and the call persisted.
That's weird.
Oh, the app's resurrected from the dead, much like a certain person 2,000 years ago. So, anyway, in the way of announcements, this weekend, i.e. 2 days from now, Saturday, we're going to be having our debate discussion night where we discuss about a debate, which will be between William Lane Craig and
The Right Reverend John Shelby Spawn, Episcopal Bishop of Newark and a godless heathen.
That's
I don't know it.
It will be at 6 p.m. So, and
The topic will be the historicity of the resurrection,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
yes.
And next week's topic here is the same thing, basically.
Yes.
So it's a good time.
And there will be Res Fair on Wednesday, the 27th, next week. So really getting into like the swing of Easter and historical arguments, because that's how we celebrate
Yes.
Easter.
We
So-
might order pizza and stuff. If enough people are there to have us have pizza, then we could do that too for Saturday.
For the debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea. I
It'd be
think
fun.
that's what we
We
did
can all-
last.
We can all
last
chip
time.
in for it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be good.
I think that'll be good.
You should come here, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About it.
But yeah, so that sounds good, and we'll also have a pancakes and pontification at the normal time, April 6th, I think, the first Saturday. So yeah, and then after that is the eclipse. So
Yeah.
got a lot of stuff coming up. Anyway, I think that's about it, and I will go ahead and leave it over to our speaker.
All right, welcome, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks for having me back.
You got your back.
Okay, so I want to start with a story from the Book of Acts. We have Paul is on Mars Hill, Mars being the Roman god of war, Ares is the Greek god of war. So this is a place where philosophers would debate. Paul actually wins an audience with some philosophers, some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. So, this is a very interesting thing. This is in Acts chapter 17. And on this hill, Paul tries to find some common ground with them. He says, I was looking at all your idols. I saw that you have an idol that's devoted to an unknown God. I want to tell you a little bit more about this God that you don't know about. Now, he does something controversial, something that stirs up a lot of controversy even today. Paul actually says, he actually quotes one of the Stoic philosophers. Again, I think he's finding common ground with them. And he quotes one of their philosophers very favorably. He says, in him we live and move and have our being. So that can raise some questions. How much overlap or interplay is there between pagan Stoic philosophy, metaphysics, and Paul being a Hebrew of Hebrews and his metaphysics? So this is a question. In fact, in whom we live and move and have our being, panentheistic reflections on God's presence in a scientific world. So this is one of the recent and larger scholarly works on panentheism. And you can see they're quoting Paul, who's quoting the Stoic. All right, so very frequently we're given the idea that, okay, we've got the Epicureans, we've got the Stoics, and we've got Paul, the Hebrew. So therefore you have three different worldviews there. You have the theist, Paul, the Hebrew. You've got atheists or materialists, physicalists in the Epicureans. And you've got pantheists with the Stoics. Now, I think that common understanding is okay. I think that's all right. I'm going to try to go a little deeper, make it a little more sophisticated, complicate it just a little bit more. But, it's a good starting point. All right, so I want to talk about theism. I want to give some analogies for theism. Probably everyone here is already familiar with theism. But, I tend to think of theism in terms of an artist producing some kind of artwork. So you may have a sculptor creating a sculpture out of stone. There's a big difference between the one doing the sculpting and the media with which he or she is working with. Same with the potter and the clay, same idea. The painter and the painting, I kind of like this analogy because the painter is totally distinct from the painting, but in a way, you can sort of say that the painter is in the painting. Now, of course, you can't say it too literally, but you can at least learn a lot about the painter from the painting. You get a glimpse into the painter's mind. Or computer programming. The computer programmer is distinct from any program that he or she might write. But I think it's important here to keep in mind that the programmer can interrupt the code anytime he or she wants, can interact with the code. It's not a closed system. Interpret the code, put breakpoints in it, can debug it. Also, if he or she wanted to, he could, if it's a game, write himself in as an avatar into the game. So these are all decent analogies for theism, what I'm calling theism. You have God and the world. And by world, I mean the entire cosmos. I don't mean just planet Earth. Also, I like this one too. The idea of a sustainer. God as the sustainer who's sustaining the creation. In the Christian view, there may be ample room for God to, I don't want to say that God is the strong force, but we have these mysterious forces, like what keeps protons and electrons together. These are mysterious. I'm not saying it's necessarily God directly, but maybe so. I think the book of Colossians says Jesus actually holds everything together. So anyway, God can still be a sustainer, but you still, can still interact with the creation, but is not to be identified with the creation. All right, what about panentheism? Not to be confused with pantheism. Panentheism, do we have any analogies for that? Yes, but I haven't been satisfied with any analogies. I'll go ahead and give some of the common ones anyway. One possibility is, a seed that germinates, sprouts into, well, ultimately buds and unfolds into a flower. So that's one possibility. So God is to the world as a seed unfolds into a flower. Again, not a great analogy, but it has been used. What about God is to the world as a soul is to the body? This actually comes out of Plato's writings. Or possibly a mother gestating an infant in the womb. So in this view, God would be like the mother, the world is kind of like in the womb. All right, so some concepts about panentheism. Yes, it's often confused with pantheism, and understandably so. If you're confused about that, you're not the first. It's totally understandable. In fact, it was actually lumped together. Linguistically speaking, there was no real word for panentheism. If somebody was talking about panentheism, they would probably call it pantheism up until 1828. That was when someone decided, I need a more precise term for this. And then so the term panentheism was coined then. And then it really didn't enter into common usage until 1950s. And then even today, you can still find plenty of people who let the lines blur between pantheism and panentheism. The Greek words just means all, pan, in, God, theos. But it's not just that simple. So there can be various models of panentheism. Not every their answers vary among panentheists to a lot of questions. So, but one thing is, the world is inside of God. God is inside of the world. There's interplay between the two. Not a firm wall that keeps the two divided. But it's also more than that. God exists beyond the world. So he's not just in the world, he, she, it. God is beyond the world, and is also more than the world is. Okay, so in pantheism, very frequently you'll find the idea that the world, the universe, is God. All that exists can be defined as God. This goes beyond that, so more than the world. In fact, this has been said to steer a course, kind of a midway between pantheism, where God is coterminous with the world, and theism, where God is separate from the world. Okay, so right here, some of the, I'll get to that in a minute. Here we go. So process thought, these are, it's also can be called process thought, process theology, process philosophy. And the idea there is everything is in process. You know, it hasn't reached its terminus, it isn't complete, it's still in process. And the lines definitely do blur in this model of the world and God, between creator and creation. About this, it's also can be known as dipolar theism or bipolar theism. It can have two poles. One pole that's transcendent to the world, and that can be considered infinite. One pole of God is inside the world, immanent in the world, and that can be things that God is not.
So it's not saying God is bipolar.
It kind of is saying that, actually.
Maybe a little
I think
bit.
that's fair, yeah,
Okay.
actually. Okay, so I'm trying to think of some pros. What makes panentheism appealing to some people? Well, I think it can, to some people, seem very new. Like, okay, all those old religions, they're kind of worn out. They're not really good for the modern world. Here's a new religious philosophy. And so, sometimes some people are attracted to what's new. Also, you may have certain extremes in certain religions. This can find a more happy medium between the two. For example, transcendence and immanence, which we'll talk about soon. It definitely gets a good balance of those two, and that can be appealing.
Do you want to go ahead and define those terms real quick?
I'll get to it. Yeah,
Oh,
I've
you
got a
will. Okay,
slide
never
on
mind.
it.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're definitely worth defining for sure. So maybe, just maybe, it gets the best of both worlds, or worldviews, I should say. It gets the best of pantheism, gets the best of theism. Maybe, just maybe, it also avoids their thorniest issues. A lot of the time, there's a lot of appeal in packaging it as something that's scientific, something that can be harmonized with, with the Big Bang, even fine-tuning, intelligent design, because this is a selling point. What's one of the major failures of the new atheists? Well, there's just everywhere you look, microscope, telescope, just you're hit over the head with design, and so this can take advantage of that. Also, they will also be happy to take advantage of neo-Darwinian macroevolutionary theory as well, to help them be, up with the modern trends. All right, I think this is a huge one. A model of this God, where God is more in the world, that can seem to make the God more personable, more relatable. He's here with us, kind of like the Super Bowl commercial that got some attention. He gets us. Well, this is kind of along those lines. So God in this model can seem less distant, and it can even seem less threatening. Also, when it comes to the problem of evil, don't blame God for evil, because he's here in the world, this imperfect world, with us. He suffers with us. He's learning just like we are. Also, for people who are embarrassed by the supernatural or miracles, this sanitizes that. You've got kind of a Mott and Bailey where you can retreat to supernatural when you want to. You can retreat to natural when you want to. Also, just fitting with modern trends, this fits very well with the green gospel of what I call ecological Marxism. And for some people, embracing logical contradictions can be an appealing thing. can make them feel, well, yeah, you can't embrace that contradiction, but I can. You know. So to me, that's a little audacious, but to some people, that's appealing. Also, I think this, because it's sort of a hybrid view, I think this gives the potential for an ecumenical framework. If somebody said, hey, you need to create a global religion that has some appeal and some correspondence to all the other religions on earth, and make it easier for them to come to your new religion, this might give a good framework for that. All right, so yes.
Sorry, could you clarify what you mean by ecological Marxism?
Yeah, so Marxism, in a nutshell, is radical equality, egalitarianism. Everything needs to be, exactly the same. Original Marxism was economic classes, the haves and the have-nots. Well, when it's applied to ecology and what I call the green gospel, it may turn into things like, you drive a big truck, we're going to deduct so many carbon credits from you. This other person over here drives a bicycle. So we're trying to make things equal. You're going to get taxed more heavily or whatever, and the person with the bicycle may get rewarded more. So that's what I mean by Marxism, trying to equalize everybody. That's just one example. So why should we take this seriously? Is it really a new thing? Not necessarily. Depending on who you ask, modern panentheist scholars, when they read about the monotheistic reforms of Pharaoh Akhenaten, they see, they get hints of panentheism. I haven't read it. I haven't read the source material. I don't have an opinion. I'm open to it. Also, some Hindu scriptures, the Vedas, the Gita, the Upanishads. We normally think of those as normally people assume that they're pantheistic, but they can definitely be panentheistic. They can actually talk about, a supreme deity, for example. Plato? Is Plato a panentheist? The books I've read would classify Plato as a proto-panentheist. So not technically, but he's opening the door to Neoplatonists, to the Neoplatonists who are definitely panentheists, and other forms of panentheism as well. Stoicism, where we're back on Mars Hill with Paul, definitely. Some of the more famous philosophers, Spinoza, Hegel, Bergson, Alfred North Whitehead, these are some of the more famous panentheists. You may be surprised, Jewish mysticism, very heavy on panentheism. Even Hasidic Judaism, which comprises some of Orthodox Judaism, their view of God officially is a panentheistic God. Buddhism, I forget which school of Buddhism, but there was one Buddhist scholar who was saying, look, normally people think of Buddhism as atheistic, but when I read of panentheism, I'm like, my philosophy fits in panentheism. Is that true of all Buddhists? Probably not. All right, in Catholicism, I don't mean to make it sound like all Jesuits, but panentheism is very common among some, perhaps even many Jesuits and Maryknollers. There's also some individual thinkers in the Eastern Orthodox Church who lean towards panentheism. There is a bit of I'd say a hotbed at Claremont Graduate University in California. They do a lot of publishing. A lot of the professors there seem to embrace it, and they may have, each professor may have his or her own version of it. Right, mainline liberal Protestant theology. So for hundreds of years, for a long time, liberal Protestant theology has embraced panentheism. That includes Westminster John Knox Press. Now, the Westminster Divines and John Knox were not panentheists. They would probably be rolling around in their graves if they knew that the publishing company in their name was a bastion for that. Yes?
Would mainline liberal Protestant theologians use the term and embrace it?
That's a good question. Would they use the term and embrace it? I think yes. I think if you had private conversations with them, probably so. If they're speaking from the pulpit, though, they're just going to say God. and
Their thinking is intertwined.
Right, yeah. So, from the pulpit, they're just going to be talking about God, and you might be like, they're saying some things that do fit with theism in the Bible. They're saying other things that almost sound like Hinduism. How do you reconcile the two? And yet, that's essentially what they're doing. Neo-theism and open theism. Now, this is something that is growing. I don't know if movement's too strong of a term, but among evangelicals, some people are moving in a panentheistic direction, but they may have lines where they're like, yeah, we won't cross these lines to go completely into panentheism. But it's becoming more and more acceptable to toe those lines. Movies like Avatar. Oh yes, I think I've got a slide on that. So Avatar, it's still, even today, I think this came out, gosh, when was it? 1999 or something? Anyway, it's still the highest grossing film of all time. In it, there is a god named Ewa, which I've heard is an anagram of Yewa from the African Yoruban tribe, meaning mother goddess. But I also, when I hear Ewa, I can't help but think of the Tetragrammaton, the Hebrew word for God, Yahweh, which in Hebrew means I am, or I am that I am. I wonder if there's a little competition between the two. That could just be me.
Plagiarism?
Yeah, little overlap maybe. Of course, Gaia, the mother goddess is, I guess, what Greek thought. Planet Pandora. So this god definitely has a pole inside of the planet Pandora, or the moon Pandora. The Halu is very interesting. I'm going to show a picture of that soon. So this Halu is the individual's interface with a lot of things. Here, you've got the shaman figure, you've got the tree of souls, you've got all the people, and they're kind of trancing out into a zenith state, possibly worship. They're connecting through the tree of souls to Ewa. Yeah. All right, so here's the Halu. It's basically an extension of the nervous system. So he connects with his Halu. This beast, this little dragon-like creature also has a Halu. They can connect, and that enables him to become one with the beast. He can pilot it. Think in terms of transhumanism. Last time when I talked about transhumanism, I mentioned Avatar, and I said, this is paves the way for the brain to computer interfaces. All right, Jake Sully, the protagonist, he's able to connect to his avatar through a technological Halu, if you will. And then through the Tree of Souls, they can connect their Halus to it, and that's how they connect to God, through that tree. All right, transcendence and immanence, two good 25-cent words. Definitely worth talking about that. So we're going to talk about two characters who don't understand transcendence. Yuri Gagarin, he was the first human to go into space. He's there for a while. He comes back and he's like, I didn't see any God. Taking care of God. Okay.
All right.
But that actually somehow very good. Yeah, all right, I know, it's time to go. But that actually had ripples in the Soviet Union back in its day. All right, a more contemporary example. Carl Sagan, we all know him, right? Fairly famous physicist, very inspiring physicist. He says, your God is too small for my universe. Take that. Or he says this, he's bashing religions, and he's saying, you know what, the universe is much bigger, it's more grand, it's more elegant. And he bashes religious people, saying, no, my God is just a little God, and I want him to stay that way. All right, so he clearly doesn't have a concept of the biblical Christian God. One thing I might be inclined to say to him is, the bigger the canvas is, the bigger the painter has to be. Or the more amazing that the book is, the more amazing the author has to be. And also, the creator needs to be outside of what it created. Things don't just create themselves out of nothing. All right, I want to talk about the temple a little bit more exactly. When King Solomon dedicated the temple, he gave a very long prayer. This prayer is I think it's one of the most amazing pieces of the Bible, and it talks about God's transcendence. So Solomon, known for his wisdom, will God indeed dwell on the earth? Heaven, and the heaven of heavens cannot contain God. How much less this temple that I have built. So he understands God isn't going to fit in the temple. God doesn't even fit in our sky, our troposphere. God doesn't fit in our universe, is what I believe he's saying. He continues in his prayer. Let's skip to the bottom. So when people pray towards this place, meaning the temple, here in heaven, your dwelling place. So he puts the location of God. Where is God located? God is located in this other set of dimensions that we call heaven. Is he located on the earth? No. Is he aware of what's happening on the earth? Absolutely. He can listen. He has eyes here. He can hear the prayers that are prayed at the temple or towards the temple. All right, prophet Isaiah says pretty much the same thing. Heaven is my throne. I'm sure it doesn't look like that. And the earth is my footstool. All right, so here, there's some feet on the plane of earth, just, speaking in picturesque language. And what is the house or the temple that you would build for me? God doesn't fit inside of our temples or boxes. Also, this is quoted in the New Testament by Stephen as well. All right, so Uri Gagarin. So his problem was he's looking inside of the throne for the guy who's supposed to be sitting on the throne, analogously speaking. All right, now I'm sure you guys know Psalm 19. This is the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim his handiwork. So from this we learn that, the world can teach us about the creator of the world. Another way to say it is we can use our reason to reason from the effects to their cause, from the creation to the creator. Just, hint, hint, don't confuse the effects with their ultimate cause. All right, Romans 1:18 dovetails with that very well. Presuming you're already familiar with it, I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. Paul says that from creation, everything it's plain, it's shown, it's clearly perceived. What is God's invisible attributes, such as eternal power, divine nature, his immortality. You don't even need a Bible to be able to use your mind to reason to these things, according to the Apostle Paul, according to David in his Psalm. The idea of exchanging. He says, so a big problem is exchanging God for created things, exchanging the creator for creatures. He says it twice. When that happens, God gives them up. God gives them up to a depraved mind, to a darkened heart, to futile thinking. It's like, all right, if you want to be independent of me, I'm going to let you live in your own little thought bubble. And so the older I get, God gives them up. God gave them up to a debased mind, gave them up. So, and I don't know if this is about on the individual level or if this is on the larger societal level for civilizations, but when people blur the lines between the creator and the creation, and they start worshiping created things, God at some point gives them up. It's like, all right, you go do your thing. I'm going to see how well it works out for you. So the older I get, the more profound I think this is. When God gives them up, then you have strange things like people identifying as furries or whatever. That's one thing. I mean, it can be multifaceted, but to me, this really helps us understand where we're at and how we as a society get there. All right, now I want to say something positive. Now, pagan philosophers, you can't just take everything a pagan philosopher says and say, that's heresy, that's not truth. Based on this, it is theoretically possible that a pagan philosopher can use reason to correct, divine some things about the divine, if you will.
That seems right.
It reads fine if you read
Reference
it.
Okay,
to truth.
cool. On the flip side, however, based on this, watch out though, because pagan philosophy, and by pagan I mean godless. They don't have the Hebrew scriptures. They don't have a concept of the theistic God necessarily. They tend to suppress the truth. They tend to confuse creation with the Creator. So just something to watch out for. All right, so I'm anticipating a objection, and I think this would be a very good objection. But isn't God everywhere? I mean, we've all heard God is everywhere. He's omnipresent. God is everywhere, right? Right? And then, of course, omniscience just means he knows everything. So I'm going to say something about that. Just one proof text, Psalm 139. David is saying, can I get away from God? No. If I go up to the heavens, he's there. If I go to the depths of the ocean, to the sea, Mediterranean Sea, whatever, God is there. He can't get away from God. And then he starts talking about light and darkness and what God can see. He's like, no matter where I go, God can see me. Even if I go into the darkest dark, God can still see me. So right there, that's more omniscience. God knows, and this is omnipresence. I think the two merge in together. So I would suggest, as you read your Bibles, consider the possibility that when you get an omnipresence sort of passage, see if omniscience dovetails in with it. And by that, what I mean, actually I'll tell you what I mean in just a minute. Okay, so go as high as you want, God is there. Go as deep as you want, God is there. But when you're interacting with the world, it's important to realize you're not interacting with God, with his substance, with his essence, with his nature, with his being. In other words, when I touch this table, am I touching God? If I touch Alan, am I touching God? Oh, don't answer.
No.
If I touch this electrical socket and I experience electromagnetism, am I touching God? Well, a panentheism.
Yeah,
You might feel like, yeah, I could
You might go meet him.
I could have, it might trigger a religious experience. It might feel like I transcended into.
It might
yes.
make you say, oh God. Yes.
But here, so now a panentheist might say that when you experience the fundamental forces of physics, gravity, electricity, magnetism, whatever, that maybe you are experiencing God. Maybe God is part of that. Now, I don't say that. I say, no, when you're interacting with the material world, yes, you can say God is here, but be careful about the way you say it. Is God here? Did I just touch God? No. All right, so we've talked about transcendence, we've talked about immanence. Now I want to offer a spectrum. This is mostly original with me. I mean, some of it I've kind of cobbled together from other sources, but focusing on just the transcendence and immanence. So transcendence means outside of, immanence means inside of. Okay, so if right now I am immanent with relation to the world. I am in the world. Am I transcendent to the world? No. If I take a spaceship outside of the solar system, I'm still in the world. I'm still immanent. I'm not transcendent. God, however, as we define it here, is transcendent to the world. Okay, so deism is a worldview where you can see there's a very thick line between God and the world. For whatever reason, in this model of God to the world, God either cannot or will not interact with the world. God doesn't do miracles. It, whatever you want to call God, designed the world, kind of wound it up like an old mechanical clock, let it run, leave it alone. But never monkeys with it, never reaches down into it, never winds it up again. So that's kind of not many people are deists anymore, although in the 1770s, a lot of our founding fathers of our nation were, of course. So classical theism, notice the line between God and the world, it's there. So God is distinct from the world, but can God reach through it? Yes. So in theism, God can reach down into our world anytime he wants. You can call that a miracle, you can call it supernatural. There's other terms for it as well. All right, I'm going to skip this one for now. Panentheism is what we're trying to focus on, also known as process theism. Here, you can see the world and God are in fact distinct, but there's interplay between the two. The lines blur. There's no hard line between them. So the world can get into God, God can get into the world. It can be a little confusing, actually. But intriguing, right? Okay, now in pantheism, I went to the Stanford, the online encyclopedia of philosophy for Stanford. They've got like 10 or 12 types of pantheism. I'm going to paint with a very broad brushstroke here. Generally speaking, when we say pantheism, we're talking about, all is God. So whatever the world is, whatever is real, whatever you consider to be real in this cosmos, well, that's part of God. Does God extend beyond the cosmos? No. All right, I'm going to skip agnosticism because it's basically just gutless atheism, as Nietzsche used to call it. And it's just a question mark, it's really, okay, there's two types of agnosticism, the soft kind and the hard kind. Soft kind is there a God? I don't know, I just haven't seen enough evidence. Hard kind is, no, we can't know. You can't know if there's a God. So two kinds of that. To me, it sort of bleeds into atheism, aka materialism, physicalism. The material world is all there is. All right, so there is no God, there's just the world. Okay, so there's the spectrum. Here, there is no transcendent God. Here, you've got transcendent God. Here, kind of transcendent, no transcendence. In fact, I'm going to suggest that really, when you think about it, there ultimately is not a difference between atheism and pantheism. I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so going back to Mars Hill. This is just me. I'm trying to figure out where the Epicureans and the Stoics fit in on this chart. Are the Epicureans atheists? Okay, sure, fine. Yeah, but the lines blur between these images. The Epicureans, even though they may be atheists, they may be able to stretch into pantheism. Likewise, the Stoics, they can stretch from panentheism to pantheism, but they would not go all the way to atheism. So that's the way I'm interpreting this encounter on Mars Hill with Paul, the classical theist. Again, that's just me. You don't have to see it that way. That's just my best guess. All right, is anyone interested in a short history of Western philosophy, namely metaphysics? All right, okay, we got a few takers, good. All right, by the way, I don't really think Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates are morons. I don't think that necessarily. Okay, so quick overview. This is painting with broad brushstrokes, so there's going to be a lot left out. So Heraclitus says that all is one. Okay, so when he's talking about what is real, what is ultimate reality, ultimately reality is one. So he's a monist. But he's also saying that everything, it's all flux, it's process, it's becoming, it's change. You never step into the same stream twice. Everything is changing. So for him, fundamental ultimate reality is change. And I think you'll have echoes of that in panentheism, where God is constantly changing, at least the pole inside the world is. All right, now Parmenides, he disagrees, he actually agrees in one way. He also agrees as a monist that yes, ultimately there is one ultimate reality. Ultimately everything that is part of that one, but that one is ultimately permanence, static, unchanging. And so he would say that anything that you perceive as change is an illusion. Okay, so difference of opinions here. The sophists, they come along, they're like, look, we've got this impasse, we can't seem to get past it. Look, when you use your reason to try to figure things out, things just don't work out, so we're all skeptical about it. We're skeptical of reason. Reason doesn't work because when you reason, you get into these contradictions. What is it? Is everything change or is everything permanent? We don't know. You can't know. So
but they give reasons for why they
Right.
can't use reason.
Right, exactly. Reasons for why you can't reason. Yes. So that continues a while. And then you have Plato, who turns out to be what I'll call the tiebreaker. Now he creates a synthesis that became very popular. Now, popular, is he brilliant? Maybe so. Maybe there's a certain brilliance in finding a way to say, well, Parmenides is right in one way, Heraclitus is right in another way. So his view of reality is dualistic. So it's not all is one. He's got reality separated into upper story and lower story. And for him, the upper story, the ideal world, if you will, everything is static, it's perfect, it's unchanging. Now here in our world, in the lower, in the part of the cave where you have shadows on the wall, in the shadowlands, if you will, everything is changing. Okay, and we can kind of get a sense of, okay, that kind of makes sense. I mentioned he's a proto-panentheist. He's actually a proto-panentheist in two ways. He talks about a world soul in one of his books, and that produces one of the streams of panentheism through Schelling, and he produces another stream that ultimately goes most famously through Hegel and through the Neoplatonists. So you got two streams of Plato producing two streams of panentheism. Now Aristotle, he, in a very big tent way, he's a Platonist, but he disagrees with Plato on quite a few things. One of the main things he's known for is bringing things back to earth. Let's get a little more grounded. All right, Neoplatonism. The Neoplatonists are synthetic as well. They take Plato's synthesis and they realize, hey, Aristotle makes some good points, some good criticisms of Plato. We're going to incorporate some of that too, and then we're going to add our own stuff to it. And so in their synthetic way, they end up with the one, the ultimate reality, that emanates into the world. So you have kind of that dipolar thing. You have the one, which is static, unchanging, presumably perfect. You have it unfolding like a flower into the world, and then presumably returning back to God, for lack of a better word, later. Okay, so that's Plotinus and Proclus are two of the better known Neoplatonists. I may not be saying exactly what they're saying, but that's kind of the rough idea of what they're talking about. So think of the one emanates into the world. And that right there is, panentheism. All right, I gotta say something about Thomas Aquinas. He's also a synthetic philosopher as well. He knows all about what all these philosophers were saying. He interacts with it, and some, including me, would say that he made important corrections to it. But he's not afraid. We sometimes hear, oh, he's just a Christianized, baptized Aristotle. There's some truth to that, but it's not that simple. Yes, he is heavy on Aristotle, but he also incorporates a lot of Plato, and he knows a lot about Neoplatonism as well. And here he is in the 13th century, one of the most brilliant minds that history's ever produced. That doesn't mean he's right. I'm just saying he's brilliant. I'm not saying he's right. But he interacts with this, and he's not afraid to get in the octagon with it and fight with it. I would also say he makes a lot of important Christian connections that fit with the Christian creeds, the early Christian thinkers, and the Bible. He's a very astute biblical scholar for his day as well. All right, so I think that Aquinas arguably gives the first real answer to a dilemma that Parmenides set. Plato tried to answer it. I don't think he gave a compelling answer. Aristotle tried to answer it in a different way. I don't think that was compelling either. So I think Aquinas does it, at least the first real, to me, interesting way. And he kind of does it this way. He says, look, there's two kinds of existence. There's the existence that God has. There's the existence that God has given us. Now, nobody gave God existence. In fact, he says God is the self-existent one. So, in fact, he would go so far as to say God is existence. It's not something that he has. It's not like a property he has. He is existence. And in his existence, there's there's perfection. There's pure actuality. In other words, there's no change. Now, God can create things such as our universe, such as you and me, that don't have to exist. You know, we're not necessary. He's the necessary being, we're not. He has pure actuality, we're not. We have a combination of act and potency. We have the potential to change. We're in process, God's not. So that's one of the ways he answered Parmenides. And I'm not even necessarily trying to say he's right. I'm just saying he's a very important figure in this debate. And I'd say probably not much of a stretch to say for his day, he was the greatest defender of classical theism, which we're talking about. All right, so the School of Athens, this is just kind of for fun, you know. Raphael painted this. You've got Plato pointing up to the ideal world. You've got Aristotle saying, no, let's keep it down here on Earth. Sorry, there's so much goop here. This is just different ways of trying to explain the Neoplatonic concept. I'll focus on this one here. The absolute, the one, is at the top. Like, that's the most fundamental thing in their model of reality. And it emanates, and it has transcendence. And it kind of unfolds into the flower of nous, which is the divine mind, which could, this won't be a perfect translation, but that could include what we call intelligent design, maybe, and more. And that unfolds into the world soul, that unfolds into the sensory world that we live in. So they've got this chain of existence. And also, you can also picture it in concentric circles as well, same idea. So the Stoics had something like this that they brought to Mars Hill with them. All right, Matrix, who's seen the Matrix? Okay. No? All right, so what's this guy's name? Neo. What's Neo backwards? Spelled backwards. The one. Is Neo the one? So the Matrix was very heavily influenced by Neoplatonism. And so Neo is the one, and Neo is greater than the Trinity, incidentally. That's Trinity. Morpheus is the dream who awakens the one and helps the one become the one, I guess. All right, so here's Hegel. He's one of the better known panentheists. He takes a lot from the Neoplatonists. He doesn't necessarily give them credit for it, though. But here's just some quotes that obviously God, according to Hegel, is the sewer into which all contradictions flow.
Wow.
Okay.
According
Pour
to his
some
dialectic, it makes sense.
pour some sugar on it for me, Okay. If the facts contradict my theory, the worse for the facts. Okay, so he's got kind of his own, model of reality, how it unfolds in history. For him, God sort of unfolds in human history. Tell me when we're running out of time. And so he clearly belongs here.
17 minutes.
Okay. All right. Now, some people will say, so this is about Thomism, Thomas Aquinas. Some people will object, some Christians will object to Thomas Aquinas. They'll say, oh, well, Thomas Aquinas, he's just a Neoplatonist, or he's got so much Neoplatonism, he's contaminated by Neoplatonism. And this guy, John Canassus, he creates this concentric circles that's somewhat reminiscent of the concentric circles for Neoplatonists. He starts with esse, which is existence. Like I said, God is existence. He doesn't have existence, he is existence. And then there's other things that, I don't want to use the word emanate, maybe participate might be a better word from there. So yes, there is some basis for saying that, that in fact some philosophers will classify Aquinas as an original thinker, but also as a form of Neoplatonist. Now, that doesn't mean he agrees with Plotinus and Proclus. He can correct what they said, but in the grand scheme, in the big tent, you could look at him as a neo or newer Platonist, and that's fair. In his defense, and again, I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but in Thomas Aquinas' defense, I'll say, look, that Pandora's box was already opened. The questions were already asked. The philosophers were already debating these questions. You have Aquinas who's like, yeah, I can get in the ring with that. I can work with that. I can, and I can correct that. So I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, but then I'm anticipating another objection. And this was something that I would have objected to in the past. Doesn't the Bible say that God changed his mind? Yes, it does. God did change his mind according to the Bible. Oh, so does that mean that God is changing? If so, that kind of brings us to the doorstep of panentheism. All right, so to answer that question, I want to talk about immutability and impassibility. Immutability is the inability to change. So if we say God is immutable, that means he doesn't change. If we say impassibility, that means he doesn't really feel things, not like we feel things. He doesn't feel rage. And we can still, you still read about, the wrath of God, the love of God. That's stamped all over the Old and New Testament. So you can still talk about it, but if God is impassible, he doesn't feel things, not in the way we do. All right, so does God change? Malachi quotes God saying, I, the Lord, do not change. Okay, that's interesting. James, God who does not change, like shifting shadows. And remember, shadows is Plato's symbol for change. Shadows on the wall. Whatever. Numbers 23, God is not a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. So, right there, ladies, Bible says that men are liars. Something like that. Anyway, God's not like that. Okay, 1 Samuel. This is God talking about having made Saul the first king of Israel. In verse 10, God says, I regret that I made Saul king. Okay? And then he also, whoever wrote it, presumably Samuel, says, the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king. But then verse 29, the prophet Samuel actually explains, he realizes, we keep talking about God regretting things. He sees fit to say, but God will not lie, in other words, telling non-truth, or have regret. God doesn't have regrets, for he is not a man that he should have regret. So you've got this all in the same chapter. So how do you reconcile that? I mean, the language is there. You've got both. What do you do with that? Okay, one more thought into this. This also gets heavy into metaphysics. Here's Moses at the burning bush. Burning bush is where the Shekinah glory of God manifests itself in a very localized, temporary sense. Moses is like, hey, that bush isn't burning. I better go check that out. It's burning, but it's not being consumed. Something's weird. He goes to check it out, ends up having a conversation with God. And Moses asks, all right, you want me to go to Pharaoh of Egypt, say, let my people go? I got to at least know, what's your name? Because they're going to ask, well, we're not going to listen to you. Okay, so God says, my name is I am who I am, or Yahweh. All right, now, I don't know Hebrew. I am not an expert in Hebrew by any stretch of the imagination. I've listened to other people who have looked into the Hebrew grammar. And, here's the story. What is his name? I am who I am has sent you. This is my name forever, and thus I'm going to be remembered throughout all generations. So we should keep that in mind as the name of the theistic God. I am that I am. All right, and what does it mean? What does I am mean? Well, I don't know. I mean, this is above my pay grade, arguably, but it's not too much of a stretch to say, all right, well, it probably means that this God is the self-existent one. If you're looking for existence, you got to go look at the I am. Probably means that he's always existed, always will exist. Now, as far as the grammar goes, it does not say, I am becoming what I am becoming. Now, you'll have other people with the panentheistic proclivities who will try to wedge that in, and to the best of my knowledge, based on the scholars who've done their homework, the Hebrew grammar does not allow that concept of God becoming. Right, and of course, okay, but who created God? This kind of fits into how silly that objection is. That's kind of like asking, well, who created the uncreated creator of creation? Or which existing thing brought existence itself into existence? You know, it's a category mistake. It's not a real question. Okay, so one thing that's helpful for me is just to think in terms of what I call phenomenological language. So we have these phenomenon. For instance, we can talk about the sun rising and setting. I do that. I say, hey, look at the sunset. When is the sun going to set? Does the sun actually rise? No. Does the sun actually set? No. Do we talk like that? Yes. Because we get the phenomenon of it all the time. It's, you know, and it's okay to talk like that. I think in the same way, we could say things like, yes, God changed his mind. When in the ultimate sense, no, he didn't change his mind.
Our perspective on it.
Yeah. And then, you know, somebody can say, they're walking this way and they say, the wind is against me, because the wind is blowing in their face. But then if they turn around, then they're like, hey, now the wind is with me. You know, what changed? Was it the wind? No, it was the person. But they're still experiencing the phenomenon of wind. So I think I would just suggest that there's no contradiction. There's not a logical contradiction. It's not even necessarily a mystery. I'm okay with God being mysterious, though. If that's the way you want to explain it, God is mysterious, okay, fine. Just don't get into logical contradictions and embrace that. I just think it's a turn of language. All right, so just talking about God changing, this is just my thought. If God is changing, then is there something beyond God, more fundamental to God, that's not changing, by which we measure change? If we say the car is moving, we know it because there's a background behind it that's not moving. It's just a question. It leaves me, you know, if we say, or if a panentheist says that God is changing, then I have to wonder, is there something more fundamental, more real, more, you know, bigger? Is there something bigger than your God? Is your God too small? Also, it can be reassuring to think that God is not changing. As we're all seeing immense change in the world. I just turned 50. There's been so much change since I was a boy. There's something reassuring about the idea of a God who doesn't change, for me. Also, if God changes, what assurance of salvation do you have? You know, if God says he's for you, says he's going to give you eternal life, what if he changes his mind? Because he's in process. You know, if he says he's going to solve the problem of evil, is he? Is he really? I mean, he's changing. All right, now a similar question, does God have parts? Now, if we're going to say that God is immanent in the world, and I'm going to say, yeah, that's part of God, that's part of God, then, you know, that he has parts. He has a transcendent part and an immanent part, an infinite part, an infinite pole, and a finite pole. And so he's got parts. And so, you know, in the world of intelligent design, you know, we sometimes talk about irreducible complexity, right? So this trap has different parts. If you take away any one of those parts, it's not going to work. And we use that to say, and it seems like there was an intelligent designer who designed it and put it together. So, but the same thing, why can't we also apply that to a God who has parts? If we say, and some people may talk about God having parts in different ways, where, you know, we want to be careful with the word part. But yeah, if it's clear they're talking about God really has parts, then I'm left wondering, okay, well, what is the greater, more grandiose intelligence beyond this God that you're talking about that put his parts together? So just something to think about there. All right. I'm going to run through this real quick and then get to the conclusions. All right, a possible objection is somebody might say John chapter 1 you've got this thing called the Logos. The Logos is likened to a word spoken by a speaker. So if God speaks out the Logos, which is Jesus, doesn't that make Jesus seem like just a wisp of air that's here one minute and gone the next? Some people might argue that based on analogy and logic. Also, John 1 through 14, the prologue to John's Gospel, talks about sunlight emanating from the sun. Could that fit a panentheistic model? You've got sunshine coming from the sun. The sunshine is not the same as the sun. Oh, what about the Son begotten by the Father? Ooh, this gets thorny. And then also, just the word logos. A lot of people, especially I think panentheists, will say, look, logos is it's a pagan, arguably Neoplatonic term. So was John using a pagan term? So there's, words, sunshine, begotten Son, Greek background. The idea of logos evolves over time. With Stoics, there on Mars Hill, it's a principle that gives order to the world. In other words, it kind of fits a little bit with, something that is indicative of, the laws of physics, some intelligence to give intelligent design. Neoplatonism, somewhat similar. It's an immanent, it's in the world, it's a rational principle. And if we're rational people, we can behave rationally by harmonizing with those rational principles. I'm going to skip this, sorry. One of the answers is, oh, you like the pictures? Okay. Okay, so here's a possibility. If you're looking at the prologue of John's Gospel, which some panentheists and Neoplatonists do abuse, you can say theos, which is God, or ton theon, which is the God, could theoretically emanate into the logos, which we translate as the Word, and that logos is sent into the cosmos, which is our world. So, is that what John is saying? Some people might argue along those ways. I'm not arguing for this, by the way. I'm just saying this is a possible Neoplatonic interpretation. Right. So there's actually a Hebrew tradition as well. It's not just a Greek thing. Hebrew word memra is for word. There's a lot, for the word of the Lord made the heavens, which, God, when he spoke, how did God make the world? Let there be this, let there be that. That's how God created the world, with words. So there's a strong and also sophisticated Hebrew tradition that competes with the Greek tradition. All right, I'm going to punt over to theologian Leon Morris. He's a Johannine scholar. He says when John used the term logos, it would have been recognizable to the Greeks. They wouldn't know its precise significance to all the philosophers, but they would know it meant something very important in the Greek context. They would know it's something supremely great in the universe. So Leon suggests that John was probably at least mildly aware of the associations, the connotations of the term, but his essential thought, John's thought, does not derive from the Greek background. So it's not necessarily in conflict with it. It might echo it to some degree.
He's just using the terminology.
Using the terminology, yeah. Let's see. Little acquaintance with Greek philosophy, less dependence upon it. Really, the main thing about John's logos is that it's so different than the Greek thought. In Greek thought, all the gods, everything divine, including the logos, would be detached from the world. And with John's logos, it's the exact opposite. This shows a God who is serene, not who is serenely detached, but a God who is passionately involved, which I agree with. And that sort of takes some of the sting out of one of the panentheist critiques. Different translations translate it differently. Monogenes. And so I'm switching from logos to monogenes, the begotten Son, in John 14. Some will say only begotten Son. Others say the one and only Son. NASB will say, what? The only begotten God? That's different. And then a lot of the popular new translations will say the one and only God. Like, what's up with that? Now you see that, and that should indicate, okay, there's a translation difficulty here. There's riches inside the Greek that are difficult to translate into English, and different translations teams translate it differently. This is not shenanigans. This is not, oh yeah, and then also, we also get in the Nicene Creed where it says, begotten, not made. So Jesus is the begotten Son of God, born of the Father. Does that mean he had a beginning? Surely not. Begotten, not made. And then, sorry. So yeah, begotten, not made. So that's the way they solved it linguistically. They say, yes, Jesus as human, the divine human, he is begotten, but he's not created. He's not made. And he's also the same substance as the Father, which is part of, begotten, So I think that's a good way to deal with it. And there's an answer here. I'm not gonna read the whole thing. Oh, by the way, the slides, if you want to see the slides, I'll save them to my website. Anyway, Leon Morris again, in his commentary on John, says that monogenes, based on its root, should mean only being rather than only begotten. In other words, Jesus has the same being as his Father. So that's really profound. Yeah, his being is bound up with the being.
That would be less confusing in English, I think, for people if they translated it that way.
All right, Shekinah glory, just going to barely touch these. To tabernacle, to have a tent. God sort of has a tent, so to speak. These are intrusions of God into the world, but God, who's infinite, takes on a finite, localized, temporary sort of thing. And usually when that happens, you often see fire, smoke, clouds, great glory along with it. For example, Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve walk with God. Abrahamic covenant, there's a smoking pot that interacts with Abraham, sort of. Burning bush in Exodus 3. Pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night that leads the children of Israel. Mount Sinai, very fiery. The people of Israel are like, we're not going up there. We're not going to even go near this mountain. You, Moses, you go up there. Moses gets to see the partial glory of God. God's like, you can't see my face. Not that God has a face, but God's like, I'll let you see my backside. And so Moses gets to see the partial glory of God like no one else has. Tabernacle, yeah, Solomon's temple. After Solomon dedicated the temple, a localized presence, fiery presence of God came to sit in the Holy of Holies on the Ark of the Covenant. So that's a localization of God. Is that God? Yeah, not in his infinity, of course. The Christmas star might have been a Shekinah glory as well. The Logos of Jesus incarnate is also one. When you see Jesus transfigured. Tongues of fire in Acts 2. When the tongues of fire descend on the 12 apostles, that's the Shekinah glory. Paul on the Damascus road, he's encompassed by bright light. He's like, who are you, Lord? Like, when you see that light, that glory, you know that's the Lord in his glory. Second coming of Christ, Jesus comes back on the clouds with power. That hints to Shekinah glory manifestation. All right, so some conclusions. Let's have some conclusions. Well, my first conclusion is panentheism is ultimately unbiblical. I mean, if you look at Acts 17, which I recommend, go home after this presentation, go home, reread Acts chapter 17, Paul's interaction with that, and see what you think. Don't take my word for it. Yeah, so Paul does find common ground with Stoicism before he says, look, you don't even know who God is. I'm going to tell you about the unknown God. He basically rebukes them and corrects them. He takes them to metaphysical kindergarten, is what I'm going to say. Now, but you read it. You get your own opinion of it. I don't have the exact number. When I wrote a paper on this, I cataloged like hundreds of passages in the Bible where sorry, let me back up. There's not very many passages that you can use to support panentheism. There's a few. I'll say maybe 5, 10 at most.
And when you say support, it's more that they're sort of like ambiguous.
Well, like Paul saying, in him we live and move and have our being. That's probably the main one.
Right.
So there's a few others that aren't quite as powerful as that, but they can cause
Yeah,
confusion.
just that, you could be led into that view.
Right, yes, if somebody proof texts it, yeah, I want to convert you to my way of thinking, here, I'm a proof text, and you're like, whoa, I didn't know the Bible said that. Yeah, but if you dig deeper, I think they can be explained better from a theistic framework. Now, the number of passages that support theism, God as transcendent, and just the idea of a firm distinction between creator and creation, massive number. Like, I've forgotten the number that I came up with, but when I was trying to figure this out, I said, you know what, I want to read the whole Bible and catalog any passage that could be used to support panentheism and those that support theism. I came up with hundreds that support theism, so that's me. Also, about the Shekinah glory, when God does intrude into our world, it tends to be a very rare thing, very rare. It's also very focused, it's supernatural, it's not ubiquitous. It's not like, yeah, I stick my fingers into the wall socket and I feel God at all times, you know. It's not that. When God intrudes into our world, you know it. Also, it just, bottom line, it confuses the Creator with His creation, which Paul has no mercy for that. All right, philosophically. So earlier I said, you know, one of the appeals of panentheism is that maybe it gets the best of both worlds, you know, worldviews of pantheism and theism. Does it? Does it get the best of them? Does it avoid their worst problems? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it gets the worst of both worlds.Maybe it inherits all their problems, adds additional problems in the process, namely, you know, logical contradictions. And there's also a Mott and Bailey fallacy where you can be in the Mott, and if somebody attacks your position logically, you can retreat to the Bailey and be like, I'm safe in the Bailey. So panentheists can kind of do that. You can say, well, I want to attack your God as changing in the world, and they'll be like, oh yeah, well here, now I'm back to his infinite pole. And that is seen as a logical fallacy, but also it's contradictions. So one of the, this is going to be from like a direct quote of one of the most famous panentheists, who I didn't name here. He says that God and the world are both permanent, both of them. They're both permanent and fluent, both of them. They're both one and many. That's hard for me. That's a contradiction. They're both immanent and transcendent to one another. Okay, these are three big contradictions that I can't handle.
It's a mystery.
It's worse.
It's worse than a mystery.
And for me, it just, you know, it requires too much blind faith. So this same panentheist, he actually goes so far as to say that the world, our world, is constantly being destroyed and recreated every moment. That's how much change there is. Not all panentheists will say that, but you know, one of the greatest panentheists says that, and I'm like, okay, maybe, but what do I do with that? Also, the panentheistic God is based on a weak and vague teleological argument. You ask the best panentheists what their arguments are for God, which also helps define what God is. The best they can come up with is kind of a vague, yeah, there's design in the world, therefore there's a designer. Cobb, he's also one of the great panentheist thinkers. He admits that it's not for people who need rational proof to believe. In other words, it's irrational. For me, it doesn't help solve the problem of evil at all. In fact, it makes it worse. If you want to say, oh yeah, God is here, he's suffering along with us, he suffers from evil, you know, evil too. I'm like, well, how's he going to help us? And if he's changing, you know, maybe today he wants to solve the problem of evil, maybe tomorrow he doesn't want to solve it. Maybe today he wants to give us some form of salvation, maybe tomorrow he doesn't. This just makes the problem worse for me. In theism, my God, the theistic God, yes, he has not solved the problem of evil yet, but he has a plan to do it. It's just, it's just taking a little longer than our patience sometimes likes. But give him time. He's got certain complex purposes, and then at some point he will solve the problems of evil. And I like the fact that God doesn't change. Also, it's like a great castle in the sky with sitting on the clouds with no foundation, if you ask me. Again, not trying to say Aquinas must be right, but I want to say, it's lacking a foundation. It needs something like Aquinas' corrections to Parmenides and Plotinus. Something like it. If not his, something that can take its place. Yeah, and if somebody makes better arguments than Aquinas made, great, fine. Well, I'll give Aquinas this. At least you know that there is at least one Christian view that's interacted with Neoplatonism and, in my opinion, bested it, corrected it. There may be additional Christian viewpoints as well that, who knows, might even be better. Some people complain about the God of the philosophers, and that's something that's leveled against classical theists. They'll be like, oh, you believe in this unchanging God, and the reason you do that is because you just believe in the God of the philosophers, not the God of the Bible. And the God of the Bible changes his mind. The God of the Bible feels things like love, and your God doesn't feel anything, and your God doesn't change. So they'll say, you don't have the biblical God, you don't have the Hebrew God, you have the God of the philosophers. Well, as I hope you've seen, the Neoplatonic God in panentheism is just another God of the philosophers. It's just a different philosophy than, say, Thomas Aquinas may have had. And you can trace it from Heraclitus, everything ultimate is change through Neoplatonism. All right, and I think my final conclusion, for me, ultimately, it's just a sub-Christian or even anti-Christian competitor to Christianity. And it often is clothed with Christian garb. A lot of people who call themselves Christians will defend and commend a panentheistic view of God. And so Niebuhr, he described what, in 1934, he was describing liberal Protestant Christianity. And he said that the problem with it is, we tend to want a different God than the Bible has. We want a God without wrath, who brings men without sin into a kingdom without judgment, through the ministrations of a Christ without a cross. And that was his nutshell. It's like, okay, that fits pretty well. But it also fits other things, like more recently, like the emergent church movement. Very similar to this, and it has this same pattern. And then panentheism, in its Christian form, I think fits that as well. All right, here's my website, cthaun.tech, worldviews. You can, if you want to see these slides and the further reading, you could visit that, /worldviews. And, and then just so you know, this talk was based on a chapter to the Comprehensive Guide of Apologetics. I was asked a few years ago, they said they've got like 100 and some odd chapters, and they're like, we just have one chapter left. It's on panentheism. Nobody wants it. Do you want to write it? I'm like, yeah. So I'm like, I better learn about it. So that's where that came from. And then also, this link is on my website as well, in academia.edu. I've got a couple of papers. So if this topic interests you, I've got more. And this one, Where in the World is God? That actually has an appendix that has all of the passages I found that support theism over panentheism. And I've since found a dozen more, so that's it.
That's really great, yeah. We are out of time, but I'm sure Chris is willing, if you want to hang around and ask him any additional questions here.
Yep. All right, and we're going to Steak and Shake tonight. Afterwards, the one on Coit, right by the Whataburger. So.
Thanks for coming, everybody.